Hello. Today we're excited to present our paper about an XR Telepresence technology probe we built called VROOM, and a study we ran with it to understand how collaborators adapt to different styles of belonging to a space in mixed presence collaboration. So to begin with a bit of motivation, right now the world is entering a new normal of hybrid meetings and hybrid work, where some people are in the workplace co-located with others, while other people are working remotely. And while hybrid work offers benefits in terms of flexibility, where people can be flexible in where, when, and how they work, it's also rife with asymmetries. For instance, those who are locally present are more likely to be included, while those who are remote are more likely to be marginalized. Much of this has to do with remote users' lack of belonging to the space, or in other words, their lack of ability to assert presence, their reduced ability to express themselves through body language and referencing, as well as their reduced ability to be aware of others' actions and presences in the space. A number of newer technologies exist to enable partial fulfillment of these needs. These include things like telepresence robots, VR, AR technologies, and 360-degree video. But none of these technologies on their own fulfill all of these needs. So in this work, we report on a study of an experimental XR telepresence technology probe that combines these existing technologies in an attempt to fulfill these needs of autonomy and affiliation. The probe, which we built, called VROOM, or Virtual Robot Overlay for Online Meetings, puts belonging at the center of the experience. Instead of twinned endpoints, VROOM provides an experience contextualized to each endpoint. For a person in a local space wearing a HoloLens, an AR interface shows a life-size avatar of the remote user overlaid over a beam telepresence robot, and the beam is also equipped with a 360-degree camera that streams to the remote side. For the remote user, a head-mounted VR interface presents an immersive 360-degree view of the local space. The remote user also has VR controllers, which allows for both piloting and gestural expression through their avatar. The remote user has separate mobile and visual autonomy in the local space. So for instance, the remote user can not only move around, but also express themselves through gestures and head gaze. So for example, at a whiteboard. On the left is what the remote user sees in VR, and on the right is what the local user sees through the HoloLens device. And so the overall arching goal of VROOM is to not only make the remote user feel like they're in the space, but also that they belong and that they're an equal to others in the space, in that they have similar capabilities to move around and express themselves, and they have an embodiment in the remote space, in the local space, that looks more like an identifiable human figure. So with this technology probe, we conducted an exploratory study in which pairs of participants completed 2 rounds of the same game-like activities. For each pair, one participant was local in the activity space, while the other was remote and in a separate office space. And so pairs completed the same activity in 2 conditions, again, once in VROOM and once using the standard telepresence robot interface. And the activities they completed consisted of 2 parts. In the first part, they're asked to work together to find and take pictures of items in a large open office space. And in the second part, they're asked to play a game of heads up, where one player tried to get the other player to guess a word without the first player saying the word. So 2 of the most obvious challenges of telepresence are 1, getting remote users to identify with their visual representation, and 2, getting others to identify remote users as unique individuals. In the beam condition, remote users didn't consider themselves as needing to identify with the robot because they described the experience as like detached and often refer to themselves as a machine in in the other space. In contrast, the VROOM condition was predicated on the remote user self-identifying with the avatar that overlaid over the robot. And after seeing what this avatar looked like in third person, some remote participants identified the avatar as at least somewhat resembling them in terms of its facial likeness and especially in its arm motions. However, others reported mismatches between their appearance and that of the avatar. While identification is important, proprioception, which is the remote user's awareness of the position and movement of their avatar body and the robot body, is also important. Our remote users reported that the 360-degree video increased their feeling of immersion and suggested that they had better vision with VROOM's 360-degree view. So for example, remote users could also see their first-person avatar body moving around with them in the immersive view. One participant, although feeling that the avatar body was unnatural, still had the sense of proprioception because she could see her avatar's arms and legs moving as she tried to move. However, once they sort of went beyond just these simple actions of looking at their bodies, good proprioception became a little bit more complicated and harder to maintain. So for instance, as in this video example, half of our participants had trouble doing very simple navigational tasks such as fitting through very narrow doorways. They reported that these sorts of actions were easier with the standard beam interface versus with the more immersive VROOM interface. Didactic gestures at a distance were far easier with the VROOM condition, given that the remote participants had the avatar's life-size 3D arms available to use, and they could sort of reach their arms out into the 3D space. However, while the VROOM condition enabled these larger gestures, its lack of finer hand articulation was more noticeable, and it resulted in remote participants having a more difficult time doing these finer gestures that they could more easily do with the standard beam condition. So for example, with this participant pointing at her lips to indicate that she's trying to get her partner to say the word lips. These types of actions are easier to do when you actually have the video image of the participant's face versus in VROOM, where you don't really have that video image. Another thing we found is that remote users in the VROOM condition attempted to use lexical gestures while holding their controllers. So for example, this participant here clapped his hands together vertically to describe the word staple in the word guessing game. While these types of gestures were possible both in the beam and the VROOM conditions, they're obviously more clumsy given that the gestures in VROOM weren't as finer grained. So now some very brief discussion. So from our findings, we hypothesize that just like the uncanny valley that's well known in robotics and computer graphics, there's a similar notion of the uncanny valley of telepresence in that the higher the simulation level of a telepresence experience, or the more it tries to replicate actual presence, the greater the user's feeling of belonging to a space, up to a turning point. So our study found that while there are many potentials of an XR telepresence system like VROOM, if such an uncanny valley exists, VROOM is probably somewhere within it. Essentially because VROOM has a higher simulation level than just standard telepresence robot interfaces. However, the increased expressivity and the increased immersion likely led both local and remote users to have higher expectations of what the remote user could do in the space, even though most of these expectations weren't being met. So to briefly conclude, so the contributions of our work are a two-way XR robotic telepresence technology probe, a mixed method study to understand its use by local and remote users working together on dynamic collaborative activities, and an understanding of how users adapt to different styles of belonging to a space. Here's our paper if you want to take a look at it for more details, and here's our contact information. Thank you very much.